Do you have any questions, concerns, doubts about your thesis, your literature review?
I haven't uploaded anything because I want to have it like really organized before you read it.
Okay.
Pero ya llevo una buena parte.
Alright.
Y bueno, quería preguntarle de algunas citas porque no sé cómo las tengo que poner.
Now, in the future, if you want, the reason we're using Google Drive is really for you to work as much as possible that you feel comfortable working. I mean, as far as your grade is concerned or trying to clean it up before, I'm going to look at it, the 28th, whenever the due dates for each of the sections of the literature review are established. That's when I'll kind of look at it, as far as the grade goes. But I'd encourage you to use as much as possible Google Drive, even if you think that it's not like finished or complete or disorganized. And that way, if you want me to look at something in particular, you can just send me an email and I'll look at it and make comments on it. So I'm not looking at, I'm not just going in and making comments unless you ask me specifically to look at something, right? If it's a question about APA, or if you just want me to look at the organization, the structure only, not look at the grammar, that's what I'll just look at that. So thinking like in terms of how we work together before each of the due dates. All right. So I encourage you to use that because I think it allows us to communicate easier throughout the week, not just these 30 minutes during our session. So certainly we can talk and discuss whatever we need to discuss in our tutoring session, but a lot of you are sending me emails and I'm commenting and getting work, they're progressing throughout the week in that way. So I encourage you to also feel free to participate in this way so that that if you do have questions about organization or APA, we can resolve them pretty much at that moment, and you don't have to wait a few days for a tutoring session or whatever. So I encourage you to do that. And also, it's safer having your content in Google Drive, because if your computer crashes or you get a virus, or because I've seen it. I've seen it. So I don't want that to happen, to you, to have problems at the last minute, like you've worked all this time and next day you've lost everything. Okay, so that is really unlikely to happen if you keep that information in Google Drive. So feel free to upload or work as much as possible in Google Drive so that that I think we can.
Well, I'll upload it today.
Okay.
So I want to see information. I don't want that to happen either. And well, my question here is. Let me see which one. I am trying to cite this work, but I don't really know how to, because it's a PDF that I found, but I don't know if it's a dissertation, but I don't know if it's published somewhere in journals.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it's published. It does look like a dissertation. And so well, it does look like it's published. So let's take a look here. The citation will be the same, so you'll use just the author's last name and the year, and the reference. Let's take a look here. Okay, so doctoral dissertations. Okay, I would cite it this way here. Okay, I'm looking at page 208 in the APA manual, and I think we'll use the doctoral dissertation from an institutional database.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get it from an institutional database, or did you get it from a website? Like a separate website that wasn't the university that's affiliated with?
No,
Do you recall?
I think it was from a separate website.
Okay, I think I would do I would use this doctoral dissertation from a web, and if you want to either write this down or take a picture of it, whatever, this is an example that you can follow, and follow it exactly the way it's presented here, as far as what text is italicized, punctuation, the link, everything. So number 42, I think, would be the most.
And if I find, well, here, let me see, what's on page 13. Here. If I took this citation from that same work, Dunkel, it also source of developing proficiency in listening comprehension is the key to achieving proficiency in speaking. If I want to use this, how should I do it?
Oh, you mean you want to use okay, that's referred to
This
as
well, this guy
Yeah.
Tanaharo is citing Dunkel.
Okay, so you'll reference Dunkel 1986, whatever this author says, and then the citation at the end of the sentence in parentheses you'll include as cited in.
Okay.
And then the author of
Tanaharo
this.
and the year.
Not the title, but the author.
Uh-huh.
The author's last name and the year.
Right.
And then in the references, you're only going to include the dissertation.
The dissertation only.
Not Dunkel 1986. Because if they really want to find Dunkel 1986, they can find it in the dissertation, which at the end should include in the reference section the source, Dunkel 1986.
So here. Es que creo que sí lo tenía, solo lo tenía cambiado de lugar.
Okay.
And when it is a direct quote from a book, you need to write the page, right?
Yes.
The page number. Come on.
Same way if it's an article, if it's a direct quote from an article. Just try to avoid having more than 15% of your text as a direct quote, and make sure that most of your text that is more than 50% is an original idea that is not a citation. Yeah.
And what else? Aquí. So then if I ask you to check just the orders, you will check the title.
I will just whatever you want me to check, I will check. I won't like just start looking at everything.
Okay.
I only look, and since we're looking at the process, so some of you are, for example, just putting in like the headings, and even though the text is in there, maybe some of it's there, some of it's not. They say, okay, just check the headings. Okay, so then I just make comments on the headings, and then they move things around. So. Throughout the process, and this will go for each section for the thesis, I will only, in fact, I won't even check, and I'm not checking unless you send me an email saying, please check this. But, you know, I just think that to go like 4 weeks without having it up here is risky because, you know, things happen. You know, hopefully it doesn't, you know, but it has. I've seen it, and I think I told you all about this.
Yeah,
1 year, like 2 days before. In fact, during their
during
the mock presentation,
the oral defense,
the oral defense, or even the mock presentation. Yeah, they showed up thinking, okay, it's on my USB. They threw it in the computer, turned it on, it was gone. Yeah, so, but yeah, just and you know, if you don't have access all the time to the internet and it's hard to access Google Drive, at least as you are making contributions, as you are adding to your file on Microsoft Word, when you're here at the university, just go into Caddy real quick, upload it, and then that way for sure it's there, you know.
And now, well, I have another question about the research questions.
Okay.
How many like secondary research questions can I have?
Secondary research questions? Okay, I usually don't refer to them as secondary research questions, but the research, I think I understand your question is that there are certain questions. I think we should have between 2 to 4 research questions, and that are really the essence of the question. For example, there are how questions and why questions typically, maybe when questions, but usually questions like what questions, what are the characteristics of this, what are the aspects of this. Typically those aren't really research questions. They may be these quote unquote secondary research, or you know, questions that you are going to find out, but they're not like the main question that's under investigation. So typically think of how questions, why questions, maybe when questions. Not so much what is the difference between this, not so much that. It's how do students perceive, could be, or how do students, what are student, you could be what are students' attitudes, if you're talking about attitudes, or how do they feel about this.
Because well, the main research questions that I have is how do teachers implement listening techniques to promote listening comprehension, well, the students' listening comprehension when using videos. That's like
okay, and so let's think about this. So how, one more time, how
do teachers implement techniques?
Okay, so how do teachers implement techniques? Maybe look at your literature review, look at the information you have from your resources, and ask yourself if you can categorize or be more descriptive in the types of strategy. You said strategies, right? Techniques. What kind of techniques that you are referring to? Because if you can throw in a couple of adjectives that better describe the types of techniques, I think you can. It would be better a little bit to narrow down your topic and research question to focus only on those certain types of techniques. So just kind of think about any ways that you can. It's fairly narrow the way it is, but I mean, I don't know how many techniques you're planning on discussing in your literature review and or researching, but the idea is what you're researching, what you plan to research, that's what you should talk about in your literature review. So you don't talk about all matter of techniques and you only are concerned about 1 or 2. See what I mean? So Just try to think about what you're actually going to be researching, and then make sure that you talk about just those that really directly relate to your research. Now, you may find some that teachers don't implement, and in general that's okay, but you just don't want to have too many that really don't relate to what you want to. It's better to talk about less, but more deeply about those techniques. Fewer techniques, but discuss it more in depth. The pros and cons, and maybe other authors talk about kind of the same type of technique, but they use different words, so you can kind of offer different compare and contrast. And at the end of the day, when you finish your literature review, you're going to call it something. You may call it what one of the experts call it, but the idea is that you were looking at different perspectives. And just remember that you're doing essentially an argumentative thesis, an essay, which is a little bit longer than an essay, but it's an argument. You're forming an argument. So try to think in terms of our argument, counter argument, and rebuttal. So you're looking at one, this technique is good in these cases, but then sometimes it's not ideal, or maybe there's another perspective that is that is against the initial idea, and then you come back and you say, but this counter argument that I just mentioned, this has some weaknesses also. Now, I just used the first person. We're not using the first person, but that the idea is that to have argument, counter argument, and rebuttal, where you kind of go back and forth between these claims.
All right. And well, es que entonces no sé si lo que voy a hacer está bien. The thing is that I have like.
Did you have another research question that you want to discuss?
Yeah, but first I wanted to know, like, what are the techniques that teachers already know, or the ones that they are already using, and then to know how do they use this
for listening comprehension.
For listening comprehension when using videos. Sí, sí voy bien. Oh.
You want to find out what they're currently using, and then what?
And then to see if they are actually, because sometimes they say, oh, I know these techniques and I use these techniques, but when they are like actually presenting the class, they don't use the technique as it should be done.
Okay.
Or maybe they think they are using it, but they are not really doing it.
Okay, so in terms of your literature review, you probably want to focus on those techniques that are most effective, most engaging for the students. When I say effective, based on what others have done on the research, you're not going to be focusing on whether or not they're effective. But if others say these techniques are effective, okay, that's part of your argument.
Okay.
And you can include that. But I don't know if in your literature review you're actually talking also about teachers' perspective about what they say. Some sort of, they call this kind of an espoused theory. This is like, well, this is my theory that I say, but it may or may not be what I actually do.
Okay.
So you have to ask yourself if that's a key part of your essay, and that is in your research questions. You want to find out the difference between an espoused theory, which is what I say, versus what I do.
Okay.
Then you also need to mention at some point in your literature review research that supports, that explains that difference. And I forgot where my book is, but Sean and another author, I forget his name, wrote a book in the 70s about that very thing, the difference between theory and actually doing. It's a gap between theory and practice, basically. So anything about the gap between theory and practice,
that would be just a part of the lit review, right?
Well, I don't know. It depends on what the focus of your study is, what is the essence of your study, and that goes back to your research questions. If you want to bring that up in your research questions, then that's the main part of your literature review and what you're going to research. Theory and Practice is the name of the book, Increasing Professional Effectiveness. And they talk about theories in use, and so it really addresses a little bit about this difference between an espoused theory and a theory in use. But So yeah, that's why the research questions are really important. Try to come up with those research questions when you finish your literature review and you look at your thesis statement again. Ask yourself, okay, is this again what I want to focus on in my research? Remember that your thesis statement answers your research questions. One statement. Everything else in your literature review goes on to explain through a series of claims how you are answering your research questions. Yeah. So it all depends kind of how you formulate or create your research questions.
Okay.
If you think it's not a big part of this difference, then I wouldn't include it in your research questions. It may come up in your when you ask questions, when you interview your teachers, perhaps, but we'll have to look when you finalize your literature review. We're going to have, in fact, next week when we start looking at your instruments, we're going to look again at your research questions and ask ourselves, okay, what exactly do we need to be asking, and how do we collect the data to answer those research questions? So that's kind of, try not to, that's why that research questions are really important, and kind of think about both what you have in your literature review and also the practicalities, what you plan on doing in your actual research.
Okay.
So the first question you had was more about just how they're implementing. So that's, and if you talk about how experts say they should implement certain techniques, that's certainly, there's an alignment there. There's no problem there. If you throw in another question about how teachers, or how they explain or reflect on the differences between what they say and do, then you need to mention at some degree, some point, that in your literature review to see. But that's kind of another element. That's kind of another perspective. So one is to see how they implement. Another is to ask from the student's perspective how they feel about participating or using these techniques. Or, I mean, I don't know if these are techniques the teacher's using or the student's using, but some question that is directed towards the students as to how they feel about the activity, about the class, where these techniques are being used. Any other? Do you have your thesis statement together?
I need to correct some things on my thesis statement, I guess.
Really try to spin. Go ahead.
Well, I had that idea of seeing what teachers think they do and what they actually do. But I don't know.
Well, if you thinking about putting that aside and thinking about the student's teacher, you could have a thesis statement that kind of links students, the techniques that are being used in video. So sometimes what I do is I put down the key words and then figure out, okay, how can I form a sentence using these key words, right? So the key words, let's do a little, we got some time here, let's brainstorm real quick. Let's put up some notes here. Okay, so what would be some keywords for your theory, your literature review? We have listening comprehension.
Listening comprehension, teaching techniques.
Video, something about video, or yeah. Are you only focusing on video pretty much? Is that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, anything else? Any other key?
Well, I have also students' attitudes towards this kind of.
In your literature review, you mentioned student.
No, in the literature review, no.
Okay, in your literature review, what else do you mention, or do you mention anything else either as a subcategory of these things that we're mentioning or a separate category?
Some of the advantages and disadvantages of using video in the classroom. And
so the teaching techniques, is the video linked? Is it part of the teaching techniques? I mean, the video or is the material. Do you talk about the different types of video, or are they more about techniques and how to use the video?
Yeah, it's more like techniques on how to use videos.
So basically, video is just a subcategory of teaching techniques? Or can you call that video teaching techniques or something that?
Yeah, I think I have like more like teaching techniques for video.
Okay, and you have listening comprehension, so are you explaining that concept, listening comprehension, or?
Yes.
Okay, so let's take a look here. So we might have. So what are some what if you had to list 2 or 3 really good teaching techniques for video? How would you explain those? What type of? Can you give some examples of some or some aspect of video teaching techniques that really says, okay, the experts say this is really a good way to promote listening comprehension?
The thing is that we have a list here of 8 different techniques that I think I should
that you should talk about.
See.
Here's the thing, Pilar, and this is kind of where we need to go with our literature review. You need at the end, when you finish, you need to lead up to say, these types of video teaching techniques or certain aspects of these techniques are good. They're good for listening comprehension. I mean, and so in your thesis statement, you need to say that these aspects of these teaching techniques promotes better listening comprehension. Now, even though your study, your research, you're not looking at improved listening comprehension per se, you're still going to be looking for certain techniques based on what the experts say about what works, and maybe even a teacher or two of techniques that maybe don't work. Maybe you find one teacher that says that he or she uses quote unquote effective techniques, and another teacher, based on what the experts say, they use a technique they say is not very good, and you can do a compare and contrast between those two. But the thesis statement, you need to articulate it, and by reaching a conclusion of those 8 techniques, there's got to be some that are quote unquote better than the others based on what the experts say, and that should be captured in your thesis statement. And so then your thesis statement, your literature review, is going to be an argument, pros and cons, argument, counter-argument, rebuttal, going back and forth, but leading up to those few techniques, right? Because even though you're talking about various ones and compare and contrast, you're still building up to a few that you feel, based on what the experts say, are the best ones. Or maybe it's not the technique itself, but certain aspects. So maybe maybe collaborative learning might be in there. Techniques that involve collaborative learning, cooperative learning, task-based learning. I mean, these other concepts that you might also mention at the end that are part of these techniques, or that the techniques promote this type of learning. So don't ignore other theoretical concepts that promote other aspects of learning, theoretical concepts of learning that very much relate to these techniques that promote listening comprehension. Think also in terms of integrating the skills or skill isolation. Do you teach listening comprehension all by itself? Or do you mix it with listening and speaking? Or do you mix it with listening, speaking, reading, and writing? Or do you mix it with grammar? Let's see, or vocabulary? So, or even pronunciation, whatever. And so all of those are potential theoretical concepts that you can include in your literature review. I mean, there's a lot of things you can still talk about, so you really need to narrow it down and say, okay, I'm just going to talk about this. Maybe I'm not going to talk about 8 techniques. Maybe I'll talk about fewer techniques, but some theoretical concepts that also are very much related to these techniques. But what you're looking for is relationships. Okay? So what I would, recommend is go ahead and try to come up with a thesis statement now.
Okay.
And then you can always go back and change it. Right? But try to have this clear idea about what you want to achieve from the literature review, and then look at your research questions and then develop your theory from there.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No, I think it's pretty much it.
So go ahead and upload whatever you have. If you want me to look at something before Friday,
Yes, I'm gonna
send me an
upload it.
email.
So
But just try to make sure you have everything uploaded by Friday. You
Yes, I
have
know.
all day Friday. Probably the day of Friday, I won't have much time to look at anything. I've got pretty much tutoring sessions all day, and I've got some other meetings and things. So, if you want me to look at something, it would help me if you could send me something between today and Thursday, so I'll have some time to get back to you. So.
all right. And for example, if I upload my lit review before Friday, and then you make me some corrections, and I made the corrections, then I upload it on, before Friday first, and then I upload it corrected on Friday. And if I still need to do some corrections, are we gonna be able to do that later or not?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to give you feedback. I'm going to give you feedback on the 28th or after the 28th, based on what you have on the 28th. And then we're going to start our next tutoring session primarily focusing on instrument design. But you're going to have until the 28th of February, or whenever you receive my feedback, until 23rd of May to basically make any changes that you want. And you need to. You need to make those changes, and even when you finish, go back and look at it. And certainly, if you have questions, we can talk about those, or you can send me emails and work that way. But obviously the focus will be more on whatever we're working on at the time, because we will have other things. But there's nothing wrong with asking questions. We can talk about your theory if you still have doubts about certain parts. Obviously, if you're not sure about my feedback, or it's not clear, ask me, send me an email, or ask me in the tutoring session. But we'll have, and each section will work that way. We have the 23rd of May will be our first draft. After you have completed the first draft, May 23rd, that's like a key date. Once you've completed that, you're still going to have time to make a few changes at that point, right, if it's necessary. But obviously not a lot, but hopefully by that point you're going to have something that's pretty close. So that's how we'll work. I'll give you feedback, you'll have time to make changes, and we'll work each section of the thesis will work in that way.
Okay, so I'll try to finish this for today or tomorrow, so you can check the organization and everything.
Yes. I will check everything, and if you want me to, just let me know what you want me to check. And then after the 28th, I'll be checking everything, basically. So, okay.
Muchas gracias.
No, de nada.